Hi, it's Stephen here for Bland Designs, and today I thought I'd share with you something that I'm going to be doing in another couple of weeks' time with a group of people at my local art gallery. I'm going to teach them how to do a mixed media card. These cards that we're making are being donated to the art gallery so that they can use them as thank you notes for special events or for special guests that come to the gallery. So the whole idea here is to make something with a minimal amount of supplies that will create one-of-a-kind unique cards. So I'm going to do this on, this is vellum drawing paper, 90 pound, and I'm going to use various inks, stencils, rubber stamps, and mark making tools to fill this sheet with color and graphic images. And then we're going to take this and we're going to cut it into panels and place these on card bases to make our cards. So each person's going to be making about 4 cards from this. So I'm going to get started with this in just a minute as soon as I assemble my equipment. So the first step in this process is to lay some color down onto our sheet as background. And I think the way we're going to do this, since I am going to have limited resources with the number of people that'll be in this class, is just use some basic ink pads. I'm using Quick Quotes chalk ink for this. The only reason I'm using this is because I have a lot of these laying around, and so there'll be a good variety of color for people to use. And I've cut some acetate sheets, and you can see I've already used this one. It's hard to see it on the camera, but I've cut some acetate sheets that measure about 4 by 5.5 inches. So I just took a standard 8.5 by 11 acetate sheet and cut it into 4 squares. And we're just going to direct from pad lay down some ink onto this, give it a light spritz with water, and then we're going to just muck it into, or smush it into our paper. And I've already done a little bit here. And this way we're going to build up some background colors. So I know this is difficult to see this acetate sheet on camera, but I'm just putting my color down. And you could pick any color you want for this. And I'm just using these 4 colors. And I am letting them overlap. I'm just going to move this off of here for a second over to the side. And I'm just giving it light spritz with water. And then I'm just applying it to my background. And I'm just going to continue this process until I fill this whole sheet with color. And you can see the color comes out in sort of a watercolor type of background, and that's okay because this is only going to be our first layer. So what I'm going to do is I'll continue doing this off camera and I'll come back and show you the end result. So we've now finished layer 1 with the application of the inks to the background, and you can see it's got kind of a watercolory effect, and it isn't solid color. There are white spaces, but that's okay because we're going to be building layers on top of this, and that will eventually disappear. So you're going to grab a stencil, and a stencil, your choice. I'm using a Tim Holtz one. These called Ringer, all these little circles. And I'm taking another contrasting color or darker color of ink and a cosmetic sponge. And I'm just going to apply the ink to my cosmetic sponge, and then I'm just going to apply it through my stencil. Now I'm not getting too worried if I don't get the whole stencil covered. It doesn't really matter. And I'm just randomly putting it around onto the paper to create the patterns. And I'm going to mix this up a little bit. I'm going to grab another stencil and I'm going to choose another color. And I think I'm just going to use one of the colors, the darker color that I used in the background. And I'm going to do a different stencil. There. And I'm not even going to change my cosmetic sponge. You can if you want to, but I'm just going to use the same one I used before. And you can see I'm not really thinking about where I'm laying this all down. I'm just filling in space. I'm not even covering the whole stencil at all. And I'm not worried about that because this is another layer. And if you want, you could throw on a third stencil. I think these will be enough. And I'm just looking for some areas that need a little bit more coverage. And I'm not even reapplying, like loading up my sponge with more ink on some of this because I want a contrast between light and dark. And I'll be right back. And sorry about that brief interruption. That was my cell phone going off. Someone was calling me and they had a wrong number. So as you see, I've got my stencil all on here. Now, depending on the inks that you've used, and I'm using these chalk inks by Quick Quotes, the powder puff inks, they are a water-soluble ink. So you might want to go over this with a heat tool after you've put this on, just to heat set it. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to show you what I'm going to do next. So now we're working on the third layer, and for this I'm grabbing a couple of background stamps. Again, I'm not thinking too hard about what I'm getting. I just want to lay down some more pattern. I have a tendency to go for scripty stamps, and that's what this little one is more like, and then this large pattern. And you'll notice I'm not going to use an acrylic block with this because I'm not interested in getting a perfect impression. So I'm just inking it up with another color of your choice, and just placing it down. And it's there. It's kind of subtle, but that's okay. And because this stamp is coming out a little bit more subtle, I think on the second stamp that I'm going to use, and you can use as many stamps as you want, I'll just get a little bit more down here. And you notice too that I'm not always just re-inking right after I've stamped. I'm sometimes stamping off. And don't be afraid to stamp off the edge of the paper as well. And I think I've got enough of this stamp on here. So I'm going to choose a different color. Now you'll notice too I'm keeping my colors all with the same initial palette pretty much. So I'm really working here with 5 colors, as you can see. I'll move those into the shot a little better. So these sort of blues and purples, and then a couple of the more tealy green and the red. And I think I'm just looking at here to see what color I have less of, and I think it's this color. So I'm going to take this stamp. Actually, I think I'll go with a little darker. And I'm just going to do the same thing as I did with the other stamp, just ink it up. Now this one's a little smaller. And again, because these are a chalk ink, I'm getting more of a lighter application, more like a pastel. But again, you can use any kind of ink you want. And you'll notice that white space that I had at the very beginning, which is not bad to have white space. But we do want, you know, this to be fairly colorful, fairly busy, because it is going to be the front of a card, so we want to make it stand out. And we'll just add a little bit more. And I think I need a little bit over here. Okay. I think that will do that for that layer. So that was layer number 3. So I'm going to clean off my rubber stamps here and come back with the next layer. So for layer 4, I've assembled just some random items laying around the house to make some marks. So I've got a used toilet paper roll, a little plastic shot glass cup, a cork, champagne cork, and just an ordinary wine cork. It could be anything that you want. And for this, I'm going to use a black ink. Now, again, you can use whatever color you like. I think, though, because this background is so busy now, that the black will allow the marks to show up a little better. So we'll start with the toilet paper roll, and we're just tapping at the ink and just randomly adding some circles. All over the page. And again, I'm not getting too concerned as to whether or not I'm getting a really good impression. It doesn't have to be perfect. Make sure I get a few off the page as well. Okay. And let's try the little cork, the wine cork. Now you see this has got an irregular surface on it, so we'll see what we get. And sometimes I like to cluster them. And don't be afraid to overlap your marks. Because remember, this piece of paper is going to be cut up into smaller pieces. So you want to have a good distribution of your marks. Okay, and let's try a little cup. Maybe I'll use the smaller end of this. Now this one's giving me a little bit more subtle look, and that's okay too. Sort of a theme going on in here because I've used a lot of round shapes in both my stencils and my mark making tools. That just happened. I didn't plan it that way, and that's okay. It doesn't really matter. Okay, and let's try the champagne cork. Now, which end should I use? I think we'll try this end. Oh yeah, this is kind of neat because it gives sort of a distressed look. Again, don't be afraid to overlap images and go off the page. Once you get started, it's hard to stop. Okay, I think I'll stop there. That's enough. So, again, all of these inks are water-soluble inks that I'm using. So I will hit this with the heat gun just to heat set it for a bit. And then we'll come back and put our 5th layer on. Okay, now for the 5th layer and our final layer, we're just going to do some doodling on here. And I've picked 4 colors of Sharpie pens. You could use pencil crayons, you could use water-soluble crayons, wax crayons, whatever you like on this. But I'm using the Sharpies because they are waterproof and they write very well. and the colors are fairly bold. Now, I am not an artist. I cannot draw, but that's okay because this is just doodling. And so you're not even going to think about it. You're just going to draw some random lines wherever you like. And if you want to do some little shapes, doing some doodly flowers here, and I'm not getting too concerned about how they look. They're very abstract. That one's very abstract. And switching colors, you can do little X marks. You can do little, that one doesn't work very well, little scribbly circles. You see, I am not that concerned. Now you're going to say, oh, he's wrecked it. It was great up to this point, and now he's putting all these marks on it. Remember, what you're seeing here is the full sheet. The full sheet is not what we're going to be using. We're going to be cutting this down. And let's add a little bit more of this color. Let's do some squiggly scratches. Now, if you are someone who can draw, you may want to spend a little bit more time actually drawing some figures in. But again, remember, because these are going to be cut up, you're not going to see a great work of art. If you spend all this time drawing a great little floral scene, it is going to get cut up. Okay, that's all I'm going to do. I'm going to leave that as it is now. So I have done, this is my background sheet. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it down, and I'm going to take this, and I want 4 panels out of this that measure 3 3/4 inches along the top. So the width and the height at 5 and at 5. So 3 3/4 by 5 inches. That will fit on my base card, and with a background panel like to frame it. So I'm going to go off and I'm going to do that, and then we'll assemble our card. So now all we have to do is assemble our card. So what I've done is I've taken that large sheet that we created, and I cut it down into rectangles that measure 3 3/4 inches across by 5 inches down. And the reason I cut it that way is because I also cut a piece of black cardstock, and I made, this is going to be a border. So I made this piece, the black piece of cardstock, 4 inches across by 5 1/4 inches down. And that fits very nicely, leaving a bit of a white border around our card base, which is a standard piece of 11.5 by, or sorry, 8.5 by 11 sheet of cardstock, which I've cut in half this way, and that'll give me 2 card bases when they're folded in half. So, one other tip. You may find that your background paper has curled a little bit, and if that's the case, and that's because of when we initially used a little bit of water with our first layer, then after you've dried one side with a heat tool, just flip it over and dry the back of it, and you'll find it will flatten out. If it's still a little too curvy for your liking, you can either take a hot iron or do what I do, run it through my heat laminator, and that flattens it right out. But really, it shouldn't be a problem if it curls slightly, because you are going to glue it down. Now, what are we going to use for glue? Glue is your choice. You can do double-sided tape, you can use tape runner with it, you can use a wet glue. I've decided to just use a glue stick. Simple as that. Now normally, if I was making these cards at home to give to somebody else, I would probably use the double-sided tape. But because I'm doing this with a large group, and double-sided tape is expensive, and the group that's coming do not have a lot of these supplies, I'm going to go with glue sticks. And really, I'm just going to make sure I get glue on each edge of my base card, and I'm being fairly generous with the glue, centering it here onto my card base, and then putting down. Now be careful about getting glue on your fingers. You might want to have a baby wipe close by so you don't get glue on parts of the card that you don't want glue to be on. And then we take our cut background piece and we just do the same. I'm being very careful to make sure the edges of my card especially are well covered with glue, because those are the edges, especially if your card's warped a little bit, that might curl up on you as the card dries. So we want to make sure that doesn't happen, so we glue down the edges well. Give it a good press. You might want to use your bone folder, but your hand will be fine too. And there you have it. And here are my other ones. So you can see 4 cards, similar in appearance, but yet each one uniquely different because of the way we cut up the paper. So that's a fast and easy way to make an abstract card using mixed media techniques. I hope you enjoyed this video. We'll see you for the next one. Bye-bye.